Dominic, Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. You know, a lot of us, I once went with a woman for 4 months before I got married, before discovering that she was diagnosed as depressive. And then a recent study that was done indicates that almost 10% of small business leaders have some form of depression. That being the case, when Bruce, boy, I'm going to start all over again
Yeah.
because I I wanted to call you Max Bruce, but um, uh, Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. Do you know that in a recent survey, 10% of the small business owners or leaders said that they had suffered some form of depression or were in depression? That surprised me, given how much we depend on ourselves when we launch businesses and run them. Well, Bruce Ross has written a book about his own journey, and when I heard about it, I had to have him on the program. Bruce, welcome to the program.
Great. Thank you, Don. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Well, no, thanks for the opportunity. It takes a strong person to admit that they faced all of the problems that are in your book. But first, so our audience gets an idea, tell us a little bit about your background, about your book, about your business, and finally, where someone can get it when it appears later this month.
Sure. Thank you. I'll just speak to it briefly here. So it's, again, as Don said, I'm Bruce Ross. I'm 62 years old, and I was born and raised in a middle-class family in Nova Scotia. And you may notice my Eastern Canadian accent, which comes through even after so many years being away from home and living in Ontario, where I moved in 1987, so over 30 years ago. So I actually lived for 30 years, about 3 hours west of Toronto, close to the Detroit border, which means I was a Detroit Lions fan, a long-time suffering Lions fan, and still to this day am. So, but I've since retired and moved to Meaford, which is now about 3 hours north of Toronto. So I've gone from west of Toronto to north of Toronto. So I'm retired and married to Cheryl for 25 years. She's a retired music teacher. And we have one daughter, Hannah, who's age 20 and going to university. She's in her 3rd year there. So a little bit of background about my business background. I'm fairly well educated. I have the CPA designation, the accounting designation. I have my MBA, and I have a financial planning designation. I've worked my whole career in the credit union sector, mostly at an actual credit union in near Detroit. And that's where I retired from as the senior vice president of finance. So I started off actually 30 years ago as the accounting supervisor, and then evolved to a senior vice president of finance. When I retired, we were about 150 employees. The credit union had, I think, about 12 branches and about $1 billion in assets. So not a huge organization in financial industry terms, but pretty solid and a great place to work. Excuse me. So in addition to the career in the financial sector, I've also traveled extensively, and that includes all 50 of the United States states, and that includes Washington, D.C. as well. So, and that's a little bit about my background. Do you want me to head right into the book part, Don? Or
well, the answer is yes. My first question would be, why did you write it?
Why did I write? The good question. Well, I actually wrote it as a self-help measure. I started about 10 years ago. I went through as I'll get to in a minute about the book, I've been through the gamut of treatment options and self-help options, and to try to defeat the depression. And one thing I learned from 10 years ago or so more was I heard that if you have things in your mind that worry you, that you ruminate over, that you stew over, so forth, that if you write them down on paper, that takes them out of your mind onto paper and alleviates some of the anxieties and depression. So that was the driving force behind writing my book to start with. Then, of course, it evolved from there over the course of time. And then I realized, especially in the last number of years, with the increase in exposure to depression in the media and so forth, and particularly with the advent of COVID in the last couple of years, I thought there would be a market for the book because so many people are afflicted by the disease. You mentioned, I think, 10%, Dawn. That translates in approximately, some of the statistics I've read, is about 17 million Americans suffer or have suffered from major depression, which I have dealt with. So that was a driving force, was actually a self-help measure. That was the original driving force. Then it evolved from there to a market potential. So that's where we stand today. So.
Well, I interrupted. The name of your book and where will be available?
It's available starting in January. It's in the final stages of publication, and at the publisher's office right now in Toronto, and it'll be available in January, and it'll be available on Amazon.com, of course, and all other online booksellers. But also I have my own website. It's up and running now, and it's brucerross.ca. So that's brucerross.ca. So note a couple of things about that convention is that there's two R's, because R is Roderick is my middle name, so it's Bruce R. Ross. And the extension is not .com, which is the normal extension. The standard convention is actually CA because it's a Canadian edition.
Well, do us a favor, spell it out for our audience.
Sure. So it's BRUCERROSS.ca.
Oh, okay. That RR is going to
That's right.
foul up some people, but
yes, it will. I know. There was another Bruce Ross was the problem. That was why we had to stick in the extra R. So
okay. So now let's back up a minute. When did you first realize you had depression?
well, that's a good question, Don. I've had depression for over 45 years, so my adult life. I didn't realize what I was dealing with, and but I knew something was askew back in early high school. I just probably between grade 9 and 10, so I would have been 14 to 15 years old. I just knew something was wrong. I just felt detached, very lonely, very tired, very sad, glum, all of these standard symptoms of depression. But back then, that was as I say, it was in the mid to late 70s. So that depression really wasn't talked about then. In fact, the only exposure to depression I had was through Jack Nicholson's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So that was my vision or image of depression. So I kind of knew I wasn't like that. Unfortunately, I didn't have a very good relationship with my parents. It was very arm's length and not a lot of support. So I wasn't, depression never entered my mind because nobody ever suggested that to me, and it wasn't in the media at the time. But upon reflection, it was back in as long ago as mid to late 70s, which was again between grade 9 and 10. So approximately 14 to 15 years old. And it wasn't until about 20 years later that I was formally diagnosed as depression. And that was only after my wife told me flat out right. She said, Bruce, I think you suffer from depression. And surprisingly, I wasn't defensive. I actually was receptive to the thought. I felt a little bit like a criminal had been trapped, finally captured. There was some relief that it was over. I thought it was like the first step in recovery, such as kind of like an alcoholic who, when they confirm or agree that it may be a problem, that's the first step in recovery. So there was actually relief when it was diagnosed by the doctor after my wife mentioned it to me. So, and then it's been a journey for professional measures since then. Up until that time, there was a lot of self-help measures. I didn't know what the problem was. I just knew something was wrong.
Yet you were able to function successfully, which indicates that you have a great deal of brain power, according to my psychologist.
Well, I'm pretty fortunate to have a long-term memory, first of all, to be able to write the book. But also, I've always felt some comfort level in my level of intelligence. I never really demonstrated that when I was younger, but with schooling and so forth. But it was something that kind of got me through the depression before I realized what it was. I just felt that my intelligence would help me get out of the hell I was in, and I like to think that was part of the reason I was able to remain strong. There was some optimism as a result of I believe there's some potential with my brain power. So.
Well, you mentioned that your wife was the first one to notice it, and I'm sure other people did. But
Yes.
who else can tell you your faults but your wife, correct, or your spouse?
Could you repeat that, Don?
Who else? Who else could tell you your faults but your spouse?
The only other person I can think of, I mean, most people really don't tell you when they sense something is wrong, but is my best friend from grade 2, Smitty, his name is in the book. He remains my best friend to this day. He was pretty upfront with me, but still never revealed or thought anything was really wrong. I hid it pretty well, the fact that something was wrong. And so there was really nobody else other than Smitty who would know or detected or sense that something was wrong. As I say, I hid it pretty well. And Donna, I can't hear you.
Do you hear me now?
Okay, and now I'm fine. Thank you.
No, my fault.
Nope.
I shut it off because there was a phone call came through and forgot to turn it on.
Yeah.
But having identified it, what did you do about it?
When it was diagnosed,
Yes.
well, it was my family doctor that I went to, and he formally diagnosed with depression. He didn't provide a questionnaire or anything. He just, based on my explanation to him how I felt, being glum and sad and fatigued and a lot of problems sleeping, no joy or motivation, all these kind of standard symptoms now of depression. He prescribed Prozac, which was the wonder drug back in the early 90s. That was kind of the end all for drugs for antidepressants, but that didn't help. So I went back to him, and that set the wheels in motion that of being treatment resistant to antidepressants. I've been on more than 20 antidepressants. They haven't helped. They did have some side effects, some of them, but for the most part, they didn't help. So then it was escalated to a psychiatrist where I live. And since then, I've been on a journey of professional help measures, including, again, I mentioned the medications, the therapy, the psychiatrist, psychologist, the dreaded electroconvulsive therapy, the ECT, that didn't help. Even experimental procedure called deep brain stimulation, where they actually drill 2 holes into your head and implant electrodes into the area that your brain is uh, believed to have depression, magnetic stimulation of the brain. I tried that procedure, homeopathic treatment, even ketamine, the drug that I believe is a date rape drug now, used abused for that. But it was actually on the cover of Time magazine a couple years ago as the next likely or possible treatment breakthrough for depression. So I even tried that a couple of times, but really to no avail, frankly. And my psychiatrist told me that I was the most treatment resistant patient he ever had. So I'm not sure if that was a badge of honor or what, or if I should be insulted by it. But in addition to the professional measures, I also have quite a bit of internal fortitude. So I didn't stand idly by. I took a number of measures by myself. I obtained my higher education as a way of feeling better about myself. So I have the CPA designation and the MBA, and among others. And even after age 35, I started training and completed 5 marathons, and one being the New York City Marathon, which was great. And then when that didn't do it, didn't ease the depression, then I escalated the self-help measure and entered some high-level triathlons, including a half Ironman after age 40. So, but what I found was the finish line kept on moving back. I would accomplish one goal and wouldn't be satisfied or feel better, so I'd go on to another goal. So that was some of the self-help measures I took. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, about writing this book was a self-help measure, which helped somewhat, but wasn't the solution. So that's kind of what some of the measures I took. So I have taken, and they're all explained in the book and detailed and so forth. So that's,
Well, let me ask you now,
yep.
are you still suffering from depression, or
Well, that's,
or
yeah.
have you learned to live with it?
Well, that's a good question. Combination of both. I've learned to live with it and have accepted it somewhat. But having said that, my doctor switched me to a relatively new antidepressant last spring called Rexulti. It's been on the market for a couple of years, but it seems to have it has relieved the depressive symptoms to a great degree. I'm much more positive and upbeat and less ruminating than I was before. The physical symptoms still remain, such as a poor appetite and sleep and the fatigue and so forth. So it switched from a mental challenge to a physical challenge. But if I have to choose which road I want to take, if I have to choose, I'll stay where I am and feel better mentally. But am I over depression? No, absolutely not. But do I feel better? Yes. And thanks to the 20th some odd medication, it's helped. So,
Well, I have to ask the question. You have a great wife if she stood by you in all of these things.
yes.
Because, how has she helped you, and what have been some of her challenges? Help me.
Well, yeah, she hasn't coddled me. She hasn't treated me as a victim or anything like that, which is good. But she's very solid. She's very objective, very solid individual, very strong core values. So has been a support system really for me, which I didn't have growing up. So I think that has been as beneficial as anything. And something I could not go to and cry on her shoulder, that wouldn't solve the problem, but somebody I could talk to and objectively. And I think that has helped me maintain objectivity in the whole journey.
People always focus on the victim, but often the victim's family, and I don't use victim, whatever we're talking about, the central figure, but they never talk about the family, and I believe in it, talking about the family. But yeah, you've managed to create a successful life for you. What are some of the ways you've managed to create a successful life that
Uh,
you'd like to share?
sure. Well, I think keeping busy and keeping with the depression, I've been managed to stay somewhat motivated, although there were times where I wanted to give up. But taking on projects such as the higher education, the traveling, extensive traveling, learning something new, the athletic endeavors, they all helped me kind of keep my mind off of depression is what they did. So I think, and of course, writing the book was therapeutic too. So I think all of those things in combination and having a stable family life with with Cheryl and my daughter Hannah has certainly helped, and my friends too. I'm very fortunate to have had friends over the years, going way back, and to this day I still have good friends. So when at the height of depression, I think the fact that, the old story that you look at them and if they think I'm okay, then I must be okay. So that kind of helped me get me through. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, but my core in ethics and integrity certainly was a cornerstone to keep me motivated and keep me going. So that's kind of what got me through and kept me going. So
Well, could you elaborate that a little bit on that?
uh, on which component?
You know, you say your ethics, et cetera, can help you. How?
Well, I think I felt as if I always did the right thing. I was honorable, and that just was a feeling, helped my self-esteem, which was took quite a hit over these years. But that was one thing that made me feel better, more comfort in the way I treated people and the way I felt about other people. I felt like it was kind of honorable, and I always felt as if I did the right thing, made the right choices, maybe not in my personal life, but when I treating other people, that just was a sense of comfort to me. And that I was always, in fact, Martin Luther King Jr. was one of his quote, the time is always right to do what's right. I always abided by that. So no matter how poorly I felt, I always felt I did the right thing, by treating people properly and so forth, no matter their status in life. There was some comfort in that. I'm not sure how I could explain it, but all else, yeah,
You explained it very well.
yeah.
The name of your book again and where people can get it?
Sure. It's called Breaking Free of Depression's Grip. So it's available. It will be available in January, and it'll be available on my website, which is brucerross.ca, and will be available online bookstores at that time. So one thing, if I could just take a minute, Don, if we have the time, I just contrast to other books in the market. Most other books I found are written by MDs or PhDs. So they kind of take an academic approach or clinical approach to the book, where mine is from the heart. I don't have a medical background, so I don't take an academic or clinical approach. I take a kind of a humanitarian approach to the book. And also other books on depression are quite often written by famous people who typically you can't relate to. So for an example, Andre Agassi, the former #1 world tennis player, won Wimbledon, won the US Open, was married to Brooke Shields, the actress. But I think the average person can't really relate to him because his glamorous lifestyle is just not conducive to what we're used to. So in contrast, mine's non-clinical. It's a layperson's approach that typical reader can relate to. There's no judgment or preaching in the book. It just or magical cures. It just tells the story as it happened. I'm very transparent, which is surprising because I'm quite introverted, but I open up my writings. But it does convey a lifelong journey of living with depression for over 45 years, 24/7. And what helped, what didn't help, what I learned, what I didn't learn, how I opened up my struggles, and the role that friends and family played. So I think those are all important components to the book that would be of interest to the readers. And because of COVID and the exposure that and the how depression has become more prevalent in our society because of COVID, I think the time is right for and of interest to readers. So it's of interest to anybody who suffers from depression or knows somebody who does, or simply wants to have a better understanding what it's truly like to live with depression. I think those are some of the features of the book. So,
Bruce, that's one of the reasons you're on. That's what when I read about it. That's why you're on this program,
right,
because just for that reason. A lot of famous people do it, but a lot of other people who have fought it have not. Uh, have not written the book, and I myself look forward to reading the book.
right,
Um, but we have a couple of minutes left,
sure,
Bruce.
yep.
Let's talk about. Um, I guess the thing I'd like to know about are what are some of the ways that you were successful in dealing with it? You outlined them. You did the
Yeah,
triathlon, the
right.
half, but you also did all these treatments. But together, it must have been a tremendous burden on you and your family to go through all of this. But what have you learned from it, or what do you think are the best things for people?
Well, a good question. Well, certainly it's been a journey. There's no question. I was very fortunate to have support of my wife and also my employer at the credit union. She was very supportive of depression, so it allowed me some flexibility to get the treatments done. But as far as advice for people in general, first of all, if you think you have depression, accept it, accept that fact. That's the first step. And after that, share with confidants. I think you have to be less careful than before because depression is now out in the open somewhat more. But there's still, frankly, a stigma about it, which is unfortunate, but it's real. But do share with confidants. One of the biggest issues with depression is the loneliness and emptiness that you feel. And yet there's something like 300 million people worldwide who suffer from depression. So you're not alone by any means. Stay strong. That's something, but obviously that's hard to do when you're depressed. One thing too is to recognize that kind of tabloid solutions are not solutions. I used to get discouraged. I'd go into, say, the dentist's office, and on the waiting room chair would be the Reader's Digest with a headline, seven steps to cure depression. So I'd flick through and just see what they said. And it'd be such things as, go exercise or stretch for 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, Jesus, if that cures you, then you don't have depression. And I thought it was kind of wrong for these magazines to print such articles because it was misleading, but that's just be aware of that. And also be proactive. The healthcare system is overwhelmed. If you don't stay on top of it for your own sake, you'll fall off the treadmill very quickly. So I do have maybe some advice for employers. I know this is Small Business Digest, and if I have time to just to very quickly encapsulate that. Sure. So the first thing is, if you're an employer and first of all, for depression and other mental health issues, first of all, become informed, learn about what you're dealing with if you have employees that may suffer from these illnesses, depression, other. So there's no excuse not to know today, given the media exposure to depression, as well as what's on the internet. Listen to the employee or employees and pass no judgment on their illness. But avoid being a social worker unless you have a background in that. Don't give advice. Hopefully you're big enough or have the resources to have an employee assistance program within your organization or human resource department. Refer your staff member to that. to that option. But also lead by example, promote a stigma-free workplace, don't condone criticism or otherwise of somebody with depression. And probably foremost is appreciate that depression is like any other disability, serious disability, whether it's cancer, diabetes, and so forth. Unfortunately, there's really not yet anyway a mechanism to confirm depression. It's all by conjecture and subjective, somewhat subjective questionnaires about your health and mental health feelings. But I did read recently that Indiana University has had a breakthrough in a blood test that will, in the not too distant future, confirm the existence that depression does indeed exist, that the person does have depression. That'll be a huge breakthrough to, scientifically to prove that it does exist. So that'll be coming down the pipe. But for now, just appreciate that is a significant disability, it's the leading disability worldwide of issues in the workplace. So yeah, it's real, deal with it, and respect your employees, and it'll be on the right path.
But the question I was going to ask you now is obviously it didn't affect your career because you
No,
died,
right.
but a lot of people fear that if they disclose that they have depression, it's going to affect their career. What do you say to them?
It's real. I was fortunate to have actually a couple of bosses during my career that were understanding of the illness. So, it's hard to speak to those, to an organization who has bosses who don't appreciate that. So I think you have to be careful, frankly, which is unfortunate still, but I think you do have to approach the right person in the organization and disclose what you have. And surely to goodness in this day and age that there should be no repercussions, but I suspect there would be some subtle discrimination, frankly. So I think you just have to be careful, but do have to disclose it. And if it's detrimental to your work. In my case, I had, I believe it's called presentism, where you're physically at work, but not there mentally, essentially, and you're there in physical being, but not otherwise. So, but my bosses understood that, and they were pretty good about it. So frankly, I was very fortunate with my career. So as far as advice to others, it's a challenge. I agree, but I think you do have to put your faith in your employer, your boss, who he or she is in a position of trust and should respect your illness. So,
Well, Bruce, your book again, and where the name of your book, where you can get it, one last
sure.
time.
So it'll be available in January. It'll be available on online booksellers such as Amazon, and on my own website, which is up and running now. It just needs some finishing touches, but it's 99% complete. And it's Bruce, excuse me, Bruce R. Ross. So it has the R in the middle there. So brucerross.ca, not com, but .ca. So that's where it'll be available starting in January. But the website has some pertinent information about my background and accomplishments too. So despite living with depression, frankly, I've lived a pretty successful life, I think, and very fortunate. So hang tough is really my message.
Well, that's a great note to which to end this program. Bruce Ross, thank you for joining us, and good luck in the future.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me on the program.